The great crystal towers of Ethros Prime reached toward the purple sky like fingers of living light. Princess Lirelei stood at the window of her chambers, watching the city below. Her skin, once bright blue with pride, now showed the dull gray of shame. The other nobles whispered about her whenever she passed. They called her the fallen princess, the one who chose mercy over victory. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kepler 442, 3 months since she made the choice that destroyed her reputation. The Krillian fleet had been retreating after their defeat, but they carried with them 2 million civilians from the colony worlds they had captured. Standard military doctrine was clear: pursue and destroy the enemy while they were weak. But Lirelei had seen the refugee ships mixed in with the warships. She had seen the children pressed against the windows. She chose to let them go. The war council had been furious. Her father, King Vorthok, had stripped her of her military rank in front of the entire court. The nobles who once praised her tactical genius now spoke of her as a failure. They said she had grown soft, that she cared more about alien lives than Zephyrian honor. Lirelei touched the window with her palm, feeling the cool surface against her skin. She had saved 2 million lives, but no one seemed to care about that. All they saw was a missed opportunity to crush their enemies completely. A soft chime announced someone at her door. She turned to see Captain Kane, her former second-in-command, standing in the doorway. His skin showed the deep green of respect, though tinged with the yellow of sadness. "Princess," he said quietly, "your father requests your presence in the throne room." Lirelei nodded. These summons had become more frequent lately. Her father was planning something, and she doubted it would be pleasant. She followed Kane through the crystal corridors, past the floating gardens where courtiers gathered to gossip. Their conversations stopped when they saw her, and she could feel their eyes following her every step. The throne room was a vast chamber carved from a single piece of blue crystal. Light from the twin suns filtered through the walls, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. King Vorthok sat on his throne, his ancient form still commanding despite his 3 centuries of rule. His skin showed the deep purple of authority, though there were flecks of red that suggested anger. Standing before the throne was a figure that made Lirelei pause. The being was shorter than any Zephyrian, with pale skin and strange hair covering his head. He wore simple clothing that looked crude compared to the flowing robes of the court. This was clearly one of the humans she had heard about, the new species that had recently developed faster than light travel. "Ah, Lirelei," her father sighed, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Come forward." She walked toward the throne, aware of the nobles lining the walls. They whispered behind their hands, their skin colors shifting with excitement and curiosity. The human turned to look at her as she approached, and she was surprised by his eyes. They were a clear blue, and they held intelligence and kindness. "My daughter," King Vorthok continued, "I would like you to meet Ambassador Jake Morrison of the Terran Federation. He has come to discuss trade agreements between our peoples." Jake Morrison stepped forward and performed what Lirelei recognized as a human greeting bow. "Princess," he said in surprisingly good Zephyrian, "it is an honor to meet you. I have heard of your military service and your dedication to protecting innocent lives." The comment drew sharp intakes of breath from the watching nobles. No one had spoken positively about her recent actions in months. Lirelei felt her skin shift slightly toward blue, though she kept her expression neutral. "Ambassador Morrison," she replied carefully, "welcome to Ethros Prime." King Vorthok leaned forward. On his throne, his eyes gleaming with an emotion Lirelei could not identify. "Jake Morrison," he said, "your people are new to the galaxy. You seek to establish relationships with the established powers." "That is correct, Your Majesty," Jake replied. "Humanity wishes to learn from older, wiser civilizations." "Indeed," the king said. "And what better way to cement such a relationship than through marriage?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Lirelei felt her skin drain of all color, showing the pure white of shock. The nobles around the chamber began to murmur, their skin colors shifting rapidly as they processed what they had just heard. "I propose," King Vorthok continued, "a marriage between my daughter Princess Lirelei and you, Ambassador Morrison, the chamber erupted. Noble voices rose in surprise and disgust. Lirelei heard fragments of their outrage. Marry the princess. To a primitive, insult to our bloodline. Fallen so far she must wed a beast. Their skin colors flashed red with anger and disgust. Lord Vex, the king's chief advisor, stepped forward. Your Majesty, he said, his voice carrying barely controlled horror. Surely you cannot be serious. The princess, despite her recent difficulties, is still royalty. These humans are barely more than animals. They have no real technology, no culture, no understanding of civilized behavior. They live for less than a century, added Lady Nira, her skin showing the deep red of revulsion. They are crude, violent, and ignorant. This would be the greatest insult ever offered to our royal house. Jake Morrison stood quietly through the outburst, his face showing no emotion. Lirelei watched him carefully, trying to understand what he was thinking. Most beings would have been terrified or angry at such treatment, but the human seemed calm, almost thoughtful. King Vorthak raised his hand for silence. The marriage will serve both our peoples, he said firmly. The humans will gain status through alliance with our royal house. We will gain ... He paused, looking directly at his daughter. We will gain a solution to a problem. The meaning was clear to everyone present. Lirelei was the problem, and marriage to a primitive human was the solution. It was exile disguised as diplomacy, punishment wrapped in the language of alliance. If I may speak, Jake Morrison said quietly. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, and something in his tone made everyone listen. I understand that this proposal is unexpected. I also understand that many of you view my people as inferior. He turned to face the assembled nobles. You are not wrong about our limitations. We are young, and we have much to learn. But we are also willing to learn, and we honor those who show wisdom and courage. His gaze settled on Lirelei. Princess. Lirelei chose to save 2 million lives rather than pursue a military advantage. Where I come from, we call that heroism, not failure. The chamber fell silent. No one had expected the human to speak so directly or to defend the princess whom they had all condemned. Jake continued. If Princess Lirelei will have me, I would be honored to be her husband. Not because it serves my government's interests, but because I recognize in her the qualities that make a true leader. Lord Vex laughed harshly. Pretty words from a primitive. But what can you offer our princess? Your people have nothing, no great cities, no advanced technology, no understanding of proper civilization. We have something else, Jake replied. Calmly. We have the ability to see potential where others see only problems. We have the wisdom to value mercy alongside strength. And we have the courage to stand by our principles, even when others mock us for it. King Vorthak smiled, though it was not a pleasant expression. How touching, Princess, what is your answer? Lirelei looked at her father, at the mocking nobles, at the calm human who had just defended her when no one else would. She thought of her ruined reputation, her exile from military service, her future as a symbol of failure. Then she looked at Jake Morrison again. There was something in his eyes, something that reminded her of the conviction she had felt when she chose to save those civilian ships. He was not offering her love or comfort. He was offering her respect and perhaps a chance at redemption. I accept, she said quietly. The nobles erupted again, their voices raised in shock and disgust. But Lirelei no longer cared what they thought. She had spent months listening to their whispers and enduring their scorn. Now she would leave them behind and discover what lay beyond their narrow world. Jake Morrison smiled. And for the first time in months, Lirelei felt something other than shame. She felt curiosity and perhaps the beginning of hope. The wedding ceremony took place in the Great Hall of Ceremonies, a massive chamber that could hold 10,000 guests. Every noble family in the Zephyrian Empire had been invited, and most had come, not out of respect or joy, but out of curiosity. They wanted to witness what they called the most shameful moment in royal history. Princess Lirelei stood before the mirror in her preparation chamber, wearing the traditional wedding robes of white crystal fiber. The dress was beautiful, but she felt like she was wearing a costume for someone else's life. Her attendants worked in silence, their skin showing the gray of embarrassment. They had served her for years, but now they could barely look at her. "Princess," said her chief attendant Mira. "Are you certain about this choice?" Lirale looked at herself in the mirror. Her skin was the pale blue of sadness, but underneath she could see flecks of something else. Determination, perhaps, or maybe just stubbornness. "I'm certain," she replied. "What other choice do I have?" In another chamber across the palace, Jake Morrison was preparing for his own transformation. Human wedding customs were simpler than Zephyrian ones, but he had studied their traditions carefully. He wore robes that had been specially made for him, designed to honor both human and Zephyrian styles. His aide, Lieutenant Carol Brooks, helped him with the unfamiliar clothing. She had arrived from Earth just 2 days ago with a small diplomatic team. "Sir," she said quietly, "are you sure about this? The reports we've received about the princess ... They say she's been disgraced, that she failed in battle." Jake adjusted his ceremonial belt, thinking about his conversation with Lirale the night before. They had met privately to discuss the practical arrangements of their marriage. She had been direct and honest about her situation. "She made a choice to save civilian lives instead of pursuing military glory," he said. "Where I come from, that's called doing the right thing. But sir, this marriage, it's clearly meant as an insult to both of you. The king is using you both as political tools." Jake smiled grimly. "Maybe, but sometimes political tools can become something more useful. In the right hands." The ceremony began at sunset when the twin suns of Ethros Prime cast long shadows across the Crystal City. The great hall was packed with guests, their skin colors showing a range of emotions from amusement to disgust. Lord Vex sat in the front row, his skin showing the deep red of barely controlled anger. Lady Nero whispered behind her fan, her skin flickering between yellow curiosity and green envy. King Vorthek sat on his elevated throne, watching the proceedings with cold satisfaction. This marriage solved several problems for him. It removed his embarrassing daughter from court. It gave him a connection to the humans that might prove useful, and it sent a clear message to anyone who might question his authority. The wedding processional began with traditional Zephyrian music. The sound echoed through the hall, but the usual joyful celebration was missing. Instead, there was an atmosphere of watching a tragedy unfold. Jake Morrison entered first, escorted by 2 Zephyrian guards. He walked with steady steps, his head held high despite the whispers and stares. Some of the nobles had never seen a human up close before. They pointed at his strange hair, his different skin color, his smaller stature. Their comments were not kind. "Look how primitive he appears," someone whispered. "Does he even understand what's happening? The princess must be truly desperate." Jake ignored them all. He had faced hostile crowds before during his military service. He knew how to project calm confidence even when surrounded by enemies. Then Princess Lirale entered, and the hall fell silent. Despite everything, she was still beautiful. Her crystal skin caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. Her wedding dress flowed around her like liquid starlight. But her face was expressionless, and her skin showed only the pale blue of resignation. She walked alone. In traditional Zephyrian weddings, the bride was escorted by her family and friends. But Lirale's friends had abandoned her after her disgrace, and her father had made it clear that she was being cast out rather than celebrated. Jake watched her approach and felt a surge of unexpected emotion. Not love, not yet, but something deeper than sympathy. She was facing this humiliation with dignity, and he respected that. When she reached the altar, he stepped forward and offered her his arm. It was a human gesture, not part of the Zephyrian ceremony, but she accepted it gratefully. For a moment, her skin showed a flicker of warmer blue. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient tradition. The high priest recited the formal words about unity and alliance between families. But his voice was cold, and he rushed through the rituals as if he wanted to finish as quickly as possible. When it came time for the exchange of vows, Jake surprised everyone by speaking in fluent Zephyrian. He had spent weeks learning not just the language, but the proper formal speech patterns used in royal ceremonies. "Princess Lirelei," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I take you as my wife not as a political arrangement, but as a partner in life. I promise to honor your wisdom, respect your courage, and stand beside you in whatever challenges we face." The guests stirred uneasily. These were not the usual ceremonial words. They were personal and heartfelt, and they suggested that the human actually cared about the princess as a person. Lirelei looked at him with surprise. She had expected him to recite the traditional phrases, but instead he had spoken directly. To her, when it was her turn, she found herself responding in kind. "Jake Morrison," she said, "I take you as my husband, knowing that this choice will change both our lives. I promise to share my knowledge with you, to learn from your wisdom, and to face whatever comes with honesty and courage." The high priest completed the ceremony with obvious relief. As the final words were spoken, Jake did something that shocked everyone present. He leaned forward and kissed his new wife gently on the forehead. It was a human gesture of affection and respect completely foreign to Zephyrian customs. The reception that followed was a tense affair. The nobles gathered in small groups, gossiping about the strange marriage they had just witnessed. Most of them ignored the new couple entirely, treating them as if they were already exiled, but Jake surprised them again. Instead of sitting quietly and accepting the snubs, he began moving through the crowd, introducing himself to various nobles and asking questions about their work and interests. He spoke knowledgeably about trade routes, military history, and scientific research. Lord Vex approached him with obvious skepticism. "So, human, what exactly do you hope to accomplish with this marriage?" Jake smiled pleasantly. "I hope to learn." "Lord Vex, your people have achieved remarkable things. I would like to understand how you think about strategy and leadership." "Strategy?" Lord Vex laughed harshly. "Your new wife is hardly an example of strategic thinking." She threw away a perfect military victory to save a few alien refugees. 2 million refugees, Jake corrected quietly. And she saved them while still achieving the primary objective of driving the Krillian fleet from Zephyrian space. The primary objective was to destroy the enemy completely, was it? Jake asked. "I've studied the battle reports. The Krillians lost 60% of their fleet and were forced to retreat. They haven't launched another major offensive since. It seems to me that Princess Lirelei achieved a strategic victory while also demonstrating the moral strength that makes Zephyrian civilization worth defending." Lord Vex stared at him, his skin showing the purple of confusion. No one had ever described Lirelei's actions in those terms before. Across the room, Lirelei was having her own difficult conversations. Lady Nira had cornered her near the food tables. "My dear," Lady Nira said with false sweetness, "you must be so relieved to have found someone willing to marry you after your difficulties." "I am grateful for my husband's respect," Lirelei replied carefully. "Respect?" Lady Nira laughed. "What could a primitive human know about respect? They're barely civilized. I heard they still fight wars with chemical explosives. They also value mercy and courage," Lirelei said. "Qualities that seem to be rarer in supposedly advanced civilizations." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance. A messenger had arrived, his skin showing the bright red of urgent news. He ran directly to King Vorthak and whispered something in his ear. The king's skin immediately shifted to deep purple, almost black. He stood up from his throne and called for silence. "I have received word from the border systems," he announced. "The Krillian Syndicate has launched a new offensive. They have captured Nexus 7 and are advancing toward our core worlds." The hall erupted in worried voices. Nexus 7 was a major military base heavily defended. If it had fallen so quickly, the Krillians must have developed new tactics or weapons. "Where is Admiral Keth?" someone called out. "Admiral Keth is dead," the king replied grimly. "His entire fleet was destroyed in the initial assault." Jake Morrison stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the Terran Federation would be honored to assist in the defense of Zephyrian space." The suggestion was met with laughter from several nobles. Lord Vex shook his head in disbelief. Human, he said, your entire fleet consists of perhaps 20 ships. What could you possibly contribute to a real military campaign? We could contribute fresh perspective, Jake replied calmly. The human fleet arrived at the edge of Zephyrian space 3 days after the wedding. 20 ships, small and simple compared to the massive Zephyrian warships that patrolled the borders. The Zephyrian military commanders looked at the human vessels. With barely hidden scorn, Admiral Ben Collins commanded the human fleet from his flagship, the TFS Liberty. He was a veteran of many battles, with gray hair and scars that told stories of hard-fought victories. When he received the distress call from Ambassador Morrison, he had not hesitated to bring his ships to help. The Zephyrian War Council met in the Crystal Command Center on Ethros Prime. Holographic displays showed the advancing Krillian fleet, a mass of dark bioships that moved through space like a living swarm. The enemy had already taken 3 more systems since capturing Nexus 7. General Korvax, the new military commander, stood before the assembled officers. His skin showed the deep purple of authority, but there were flecks of red that revealed his anger and frustration. The Krillians have changed their tactics, he announced. Their bioships are adapting to our weapons faster than before. Our energy beams have little effect, and their regenerative abilities allow them to repair damage almost instantly. Lord Vex, attending the meeting as the king's representative, gestured dismissively. Surely our superior technology and tactics will prevail. The Krillians are nothing more than animals flying in organic ships. Animals that have destroyed 4 of our fleets, General Korvax replied grimly. We need new strategies. Jake Morrison and his wife sat in the back of the chamber, officially present as observers but clearly unwelcome. Princess Lirelei had been stripped of her military rank and was not allowed to participate in the planning. Jake, as a foreign diplomat, had no official role in military decisions. What about the human fleet? Asked Captain Drex, one of the younger officers. They claimed to have experience with unconventional tactics. Several officers laughed. General Korvax looked at the tactical displays showing the human ships. 20 vessels, each smaller than our escort frigates. What could they possibly contribute? Jake stood up. General, if I may suggest— You may not, Lord Vex interrupted. This is a military matter for Zephyrian officers. Your people can watch and learn if they are capable of understanding real warfare. Jake sat back down, but Lirelei could see the tension in his shoulders. She had been watching him carefully during the briefing, and she noticed that he was taking notes on everything. He was studying the Krillian tactics with the same intensity he had shown when learning Zephyrian customs. The meeting continued for hours. The Zephyrian officers discussed formations and weapon deployments, but their strategies were all variations of the same basic approach. They would meet the Krillians in direct combat, hoping their superior technology would overcome the enemy's biological advantages. Lirelei knew it would not work. She had fought the Krillians before, and she understood their strengths better than anyone in the room. But her father had made it clear that she was not to speak during military meetings. After the council ended, Jake and Lirelei walked through the palace gardens. The twin suns were setting, painting the crystal city in shades of gold and red. They had barely spoken since the wedding, both trying to understand their new situation. Your military leaders, Jake said carefully. They seem very confident. They are fools, Lirelei replied, then immediately looked around to make sure no one had heard her. I should not say such things. Why not? You have more experience fighting the Krillians than anyone else? Lirelei stopped walking and turned to face him. You really want to know what I think? I want to know everything you think about military strategy, Jake said seriously. My people are about to fight beside yours. I need to understand what we're facing. For the first time since her disgrace, someone was asking for her professional opinion. Lirelei felt her skin shift toward a warmer blue. The Krillians are not just animals, she said. They are intelligent, and their bioships are more than just vessels. Each ship is connected to the others through organic networks. They share information instantly, adapt to new threats, and coordinate their attacks better than any mechanical fleet. So how do you fight them? You don't fight them the way we have been fighting. Direct confrontation plays to their strengths. You need to be unpredictable, to attack in ways they cannot adapt to quickly enough. Jake nodded thoughtfully. What if I told you that human military doctrine is based on exactly that principle? What do you mean? Humans have always been the smaller, weaker species on our world. We learn to survive by being clever, by using our environment, by attacking when and where the enemy least expected it. That night, Jake contacted Admiral Collins on a private channel. The two men had served together years ago, and Collins trusted Jake's judgment. "Ben," Jake said, "I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. I'm listening. I want you to offer our services to the Zephyrian fleet as scouts and support vessels. Let them think we're just tagging along to watch and learn." Collins frowned at the display. "Jake, we both know these alien ships are going to get slaughtered if they fight the way they're planning. Are you asking me to let my people die for nothing? I'm asking you to trust me. And I'm asking you to be ready to do what humans do best. When the situation goes bad, which is? Adapt and survive." The next morning brought news that the Krillian fleet had reached the Zarian system, only 2 jumps away from Ethros Prime. The enemy force was massive, over 400 bioships of various sizes. The largest ones were kilometers long looking, more like living creatures than spacecraft. General Korvax assembled his fleet in the Zarian system to make their stand. 200 Zephyrian warships took formation, their crystal hulls gleaming in the light of the system's star. The human fleet took position at the rear, officially designated as observers and emergency support. Admiral Collins studied the tactical displays from his bridge. The Krillian fleet was approaching in a formation that looked organic and flowing, like a school of fish or a flock of birds. Their bioships pulsed with internal light, and he could see smaller vessels moving between the larger ones like parasites on a host. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving tactical data from the Zephyrian flagship." Collins looked at the information and shook his head. The Zephyrian battle plan was textbook perfect for fighting other conventional fleets. It was also exactly the wrong approach for fighting an adaptive organic enemy. The battle began when the 2 fleets came within weapons range. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with their energy weapons, brilliant beams of light that struck the Krillian bioships. The organic vessels absorbed the energy and began to glow brighter, their surfaces rippling as they adapted to the attack. The Krillians responded by launching swarms of smaller organisms that moved toward the Zephyrian ships like missiles. But these were not simple projectiles. They were living creatures that could change course, avoid defensive fire, and even merge together to form larger attack forms within minutes. It became clear that the Zephyrian weapons were becoming less effective. The bioships were adapting to the energy frequencies, developing resistance to the attacks. Meanwhile, the organic missiles were penetrating the Zephyrian shields and beginning to eat through their crystal hulls. "Sir," Collins' tactical officer reported, "the Zephyrian formation is breaking apart. They're taking heavy casualties." Collins watched as 3 Zephyrian cruisers were overwhelmed by the organic attackers. The bioships were not just destroying their enemies, they were consuming them, growing larger and stronger with each victory. "Admiral," came Jake Morrison's voice over the private channel, "it's time. Time for what?" "Time to show them how humans fight." Collins looked at his fleet of 20 ships, tiny compared to the massive battle raging around them. Then he thought about every underdog victory in human history, every time his species had faced impossible odds and found a way to win. "All ships," he broadcasted to his fleet. "This is Admiral Collins. Forget everything you know about conventional space combat. Today we're going to teach these aliens why you never count out humanity." The human ships broke formation and scattered in all directions. To the Zephyrians, it looked like the humans were fleeing in panic. Some of the Krillian bioships began to pursue them, seeing easy prey, but Collins had studied the enemy carefully. He had noticed that the bioships communicated through organic networks, sharing information about threats and adaptations. That network was their greatest strength, but it was also a weakness that could be exploited. Target the neural clusters, he ordered. Quantum torpedoes, maximum yield. The human ships launched their most advanced weapons, but not at the main hulls of the bioships. Instead, they targeted the small organic nodes that connected the ships to their communication network. The effect was immediate and devastating. As the neural clusters were destroyed, the bioships began to lose their coordination. They could no longer share information about weapon adaptations or coordinate their attacks. Now, Collins broadcasted, hit them with everything we've got. Different weapons, different attack patterns, don't let them adapt. The human ships unleashed a barrage of diverse weapons. Kinetic projectiles, plasma bolts, electromagnetic pulses, and even old-fashioned explosive missiles. News of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In every spaceport, every trading station, every government center, beings talked about the impossible battle at Zarian. 20 tiny human ships had destroyed a Krillian fleet that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could not defeat on Ethros Prime. King Vorthok sat in his private chambers, reading reports from the battle. His advisors waited nervously as his skin shifted through various shades of purple and blue. The king was trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for his empire. "The humans," he said finally. "How many ships did they lose?" "3. "Your Majesty," replied General Korvax. "We lost 47 vessels and over 30,000 soldiers. They lost 3 ships and perhaps 200 people." Lord Vex shook his head in disbelief. "It must have been luck. Or perhaps the Krillians were already weakened by our initial attack." "I was there," General Korvax said quietly. "It was not luck. The humans fought like nothing I have ever seen. They used tactics that seemed impossible, weapons I did not know existed, and coordination that was perfect despite having no apparent central command." King Vorthok stood and walked to his window, looking out at the crystal city below. In the streets, crowds had gathered to celebrate the victory, but he knew the truth that they did not. The victory belonged to humanity, not to the Zephyrian Empire. "Where is my daughter?" he asked. "Princess Lirelei and Ambassador Morrison are at the military academy," General Korvax replied. "Admiral Collins has requested permission to establish a joint training program." The king's skin showed a flash of interest. "What kind of training program?" "He wants to teach our officers human tactics and learn our technology in return. Princess Lirelei has been working with them as a translator and strategic advisor." This was news to the king. His disgraced daughter, whom he had married off to a primitive human, was now advising the most successful military leaders in recent history. Meanwhile, at the military academy, Princess Lirelei stood before a group of young Zephyrian officers. For the first time in months, she was discussing military strategy, and her skin glowed with the blue of excitement and purpose. "The key to understanding human tactics," she explained, "is to forget everything you know about honor in battle. Humans do not fight to prove their superiority. They fight to win, and they will use any method that achieves victory." One of the young officers, Captain Drix, raised his hand. "But, Princess, surely there are rules of engagement? Standards of civilized warfare?" "The Krillians do not follow rules," Lirelei replied. "They eat their enemies and use their biomass to grow stronger. Humans understand that when facing such an enemy, traditional honor becomes a luxury you cannot afford." Admiral Collins entered the classroom, followed by Jake Morrison. The human admiral's presence still made some of the Zephyrian officers uncomfortable, but they could no longer dismiss him as primitive. "Princess Lirelei is correct," Collins said. "Human military doctrine is based on a simple principle: adapt or die. We study our enemies, learn their weaknesses, and exploit those weaknesses without mercy." "But how do you coordinate such complex attacks without central command?" asked another officer. Jake Morrison stepped forward. "Individual initiative. Every human soldier is trained to think independently, to make decisions based on the situation rather than following rigid orders. When Admiral Collins scattered our fleet, each captain knew what needed to be done without being told. Captain Drix looked confused. But that sounds like chaos. How do you maintain unit cohesion? Through shared understanding of the mission, Collins explained. Every person in our fleet understood the goal: disrupt the Krillian coordination and exploit their vulnerabilities. How they achieved that goal was left to their judgment and creativity. Princess Lirelei nodded enthusiastically. This is what I tried to explain after the Battle of Kepler 442. Sometimes the right tactical decision requires abandoning the original plan and adapting to new circumstances. The classroom fell silent. For the first time, the young officers were hearing Princess Lirelei's controversial decision described as good tactics rather than shameful failure over the following weeks. More reports arrived from across the galaxy. The destruction of the Krillian fleet at Zarian had triggered a chain reaction of events that no one had anticipated. The Altarian Republic, which had been paying tribute to the Krillians for decades, declared independence and requested human military advisors. The Vegan Confederacy canceled their non-aggression pact with the Krillian Syndicate and began preparing for war. Most shocking of all, the Krillian homeworlds had gone silent. No ships, no communications, no movement at all. It was as if the entire syndicate had simply vanished. "They're afraid," Jake explained to his wife as they walked through the palace gardens. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy they couldn't adapt to quickly enough. They're probably rebuilding their entire military strategy. Lirelei squeezed his arm. "You realize what this means? Humanity has become the most feared military force in the galaxy, and they only use 20 ships. 20 ships and the right tactics," Jake corrected. "But yes, I think other species are starting to pay attention to us." They were interrupted by a messenger who approached with obvious nervousness. "Princess Ambassador, His Majesty requests your immediate presence in the throne room." When they arrived, they found the throne room filled with foreign ambassadors. Representatives from dozens of species stood in small groups, their conversations creating a buzz of different languages and communication methods. King Vorthik sat on his throne, his skin showing the deep purple of authority mixed with something that might have been satisfaction. When he saw his daughter and son-in-law enter, he gestured for them to approach. "My dear daughter," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "it seems your marriage has brought unexpected benefits to our empire." Lirelei looked around at the assembled ambassadors. She recognized representatives from the Centauri Alliance, the Andromedan Council, even the distant Magellanic colonies. "Father," she said carefully, "what is happening here?" "These distinguished beings," the king replied, "have all come to request the same thing. They want to establish formal alliances with the Zephyrian Empire, and they specifically want access to our new human military advisors." Ambassador Kell from the Centauri Alliance stepped forward. "Princess, we have studied the reports from Zarian. We would be honored to learn from human tactical expertise." "The Andromedan Council offers substantial trade concessions," added another. "Ambassador, in exchange for joint training exercises with human forces." Jake looked at the crowd of eager ambassadors and realized what was happening. Humanity had become valuable, and everyone wanted to be their friend before someone else claimed them as exclusive allies. "Your Majesty," Jake said diplomatically, "the Terran Federation would be happy to discuss mutual cooperation agreements with all interested parties. However, we believe that such arrangements should benefit everyone involved." King Vorthok's skin shifted to a pleased shade of blue. "Of course. Perhaps we should establish a formal council to coordinate these new relationships. Princess Lirelei, as the wife of the human ambassador, would be the natural choice to lead such a council." The suggestion caused another stir among the ambassadors. Princess Lirelei, who had been a disgraced exile just weeks ago, was suddenly being positioned as one of the most important political figures in the galaxy, but not everyone was pleased with these developments. In the shadows of the throne room, Lord Vex watched the proceedings with growing alarm. The old order of galactic politics was crumbling, and species that had been considered inferior were suddenly being treated as equals or even superiors. That evening, Lord Vex met secretly with representatives from several other powerful species. The celestial dominion, the hegemony of worlds, the ancient races that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Lord Vex said to the assembled group. "If we permit these humans to upset the natural order, everything we have built will collapse." Ambassador Zenth of the Celestial Dominion nodded gravely. "The humans are a disease. They spread chaos and disorder wherever they go. They must be eliminated before they can corrupt more civilizations." "But they have proven themselves in battle," pointed out another representative. "The Krillian defeat was not luck." 20 ships, Lord Vex replied dismissively. "What could they do against the combined fleets of the old powers? We have thousands of vessels, ancient weapons, technologies beyond their understanding." The meeting continued late into the night, as the representatives of the old galactic order planned what they called the Great Correction. They would strike simultaneously at human worlds, destroying this upstart species before it could spread its influence further. They had no idea that human intelligence networks had already detected their planning. Admiral Collins received a warning while reviewing tactical reports with Princess Lirelei and Jake Morrison. "How many ships are we talking about?" Jake asked. Collins studied the intelligence data. "Best estimate is 1,200 vessels from 8 different species, coordinated by the Celestial Dominion. They plan to hit Earth, Mars, and all our major colonies simultaneously." Lirelei looked at the numbers in shock. "That's impossible to defend against." The combined fleet of the old powers gathered at the edge of the Sol system like a storm cloud of metal and energy. 1,200 ships from 8 different species, all united in their desire to crush humanity before it could change the galaxy. Any further, Admiral Zenth of the Celestial Dominion commanded the massive fleet from his flagship, a vessel so large it could house entire cities. Around him, the ships of the other ancient races formed a perfect battle formation that had been used to conquer worlds for thousands of years. "Begin the attack," Zenth ordered. "Destroy all human worlds. Leave nothing alive." But as the fleet moved toward Earth, they encountered something unexpected. Waiting for them in the outer solar system was not just the small human fleet, but ships from dozens of other species. The Zephyrian Empire had sent 50 of their best warships. The Altarian Republic contributed 30 vessels. Even small trading worlds had sent whatever ships they could spare. Admiral Collins stood on the bridge of the TFS Liberty, studying the massive enemy force approaching his position. His fleet had grown from 20 ships to over 300, but they were still outnumbered 4-1. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Princess Lirelei." The holographic display activated, showing Princess Lirelei standing on the bridge of a Zephyrian command ship. Her skin glowed with the blue of determination, and she wore the uniform of a Zephyrian admiral. King Vorthak had restored her military rank for this battle. "Admiral Collins," she said, "the Zephyrian fleet is ready to follow human tactical command." "What are your orders?" Similar messages came from the commanders of the other allied fleets. Species that had never worked together before were now placing themselves under human leadership. Collins activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Collins. Today we face an enemy that believes the galaxy belongs to them simply because they are old and powerful. They think that might makes right, and that younger species exist only to serve their interests." He paused, looking at the tactical display that showed the approaching enemy fleet. "They are about to learn that the universe has new rules now. Rules written by courage, not age. Rules enforced by justice, not power." The battle began when the celestial ships opened fire with weapons that had conquered countless worlds. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, striking the human formation. But instead of meeting them head-on, the Allied fleet scattered in all directions. Admiral Zenth watched in confusion as his perfect formation faced no organized resistance. "Where are they going?" he demanded. His tactical officer studied the display. "Sir, they appear to be retreating in panic." But Jake Morrison, watching the battle from the command center on Ethros Prime, knew better. He had helped plan this strategy with Admiral Collins and Princess Lirelei. The scattered movement was not retreat, it was preparation. Now, Collins broadcasted to his fleet. Execute Operation Underdog. The Allied ships suddenly changed direction, converging on the Celestial fleet from every angle. But they did not attack the main battle group. Instead, they targeted the supply ships, the command vessels, and the communication relays that held the massive fleet together. Captain Chun led a squadron of human and Zephyrian ships against the enemy sensor network. They destroyed the massive scanning arrays that the ancient fleets relied on to coordinate their attacks. Suddenly, 1,200 ships became 1,200 individual vessels. Fighting blind, Captain Lopez coordinated strikes against the fuel depots and ammunition carriers. Her mixed force of human and Altarian ships used hit-and-run tactics to cripple the enemy's ability to sustain a long battle, but the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Princess Lirelei led a combined force of Zephyrian and human ships directly toward Admiral Zenth's flagship. The massive vessel was protected by heavy shields and armor, but Lirelei had studied its design during her years of military service. Target the primary power coupling, she ordered. Concentrated fire on the port engine section. The mixed force unleashed everything they had at a single point on the enemy flagship. Human quantum torpedoes, Zephyrian energy beams, and exotic weapons from a dozen other species all struck the same target. The massive ship's shields failed, and explosions rippled across its hull. Admiral Zenth felt his vessel shudder under the assault. "Impossible," he said. "No one has ever penetrated our defenses." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "our power systems are failing. We're losing engine control." But the real shock came when Admiral Zenth realized that the attack was being led by Princess Lirelei, the Zephyrian officer who had been disgraced for showing mercy to civilians. "How can she fight us?" he demanded. "She is one of the old nobility. She should understand the natural order." On her bridge, Princess Lirelei heard his transmission and opened a channel to respond. "I understand perfectly," she said. "I understand that the old order was built on fear and oppression. I understand that it kept entire species in chains, while pretending it was for their own good." Her voice carried across the communication networks to every ship in both fleets. "The natural order you speak of is not natural at all. It is a system designed to keep the powerful in power and the weak in submission. Today, we replace it with something better." The battle continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The ancient fleets had superior numbers and powerful weapons, but they were fighting the old kind of war. The Allied forces fought with new tactics, new strategies, and most importantly, new motivation. They were not fighting for conquest or dominance. They were fighting for the right to determine their own futures. One by one, the ships of the old powers began to surrender. Their perfect formations crumbled under attacks they could not predict or counter. Their ancient weapons proved useless against enemies who refused to fight according to traditional rules. Admiral Zenth's flagship was the last to fall. Surrounded by Allied vessels and with his ship crippled, he had no choice but to accept defeat. "This is Admiral Zenth," he transmitted on all frequencies. "I surrender my fleet to the Alliance." Collins opened a channel to respond. "Admiral, your surrender is accepted. All ships will stand down and prepare to be boarded for formal surrender ceremonies." But Jake Morrison had a different message to send. He activated the communication system from Ethros Prime, broadcasting to every ship in both fleets and every listening station across the galaxy. "People of the galaxy," he began, "today marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. For too long, our civilizations have been divided by fear, prejudice, and the belief that some species are naturally superior to others." His words reached billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. On trading stations and colony worlds, in government centers and military bases, everyone stopped to listen. "Today we have proven that cooperation is stronger than domination, that justice is more powerful than oppression, and that the future belongs to those who choose to build it together rather than those who cling to the past." On the Zephyrian flagship, Princess Lirelei stood beside her human officers and felt her skin glow with the bright blue of hope and pride. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From disgraced princess to admiral of the most important fleet in galactic history, King Vorthak, watching the broadcast from his throne room, felt his skin shift through a dozen different colors as he processed what had happened. His daughter, whom he had cast out in shame, had become the hero of a new galactic alliance. The human he had given her to as an insult had become the architect of a new era of peace and cooperation. Lord Vex, standing beside the king, could only watch in stunned silence as everything he believed about galactic politics crumbled around him. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "what do we do now?" King Vorthak looked at the holographic display showing his daughter accepting the surrender of forces that had once been among the most powerful in the galaxy. "Now," he said, "we learn to live in the world our children have built for us." Across the galaxy, the news of the great battle spread like wildfire. Humanity had faced impossible odds and won again, but this time they had not fought alone. They had united dozens of species in a common cause and shown that the old divisions between civilizations were not necessary on Earth. Celebrations filled the streets as people realized that their world was safe and their species had become the center of a new galactic community on colony worlds throughout human space. Beings from different species worked together to build settlements that would have been impossible under the old system, but perhaps the most important change was happening in the minds of ordinary beings across the galaxy. Children of different species played together without fear or prejudice. Scientists shared knowledge that had been kept secret for centuries. Artists created new forms of beauty that combined the best of multiple cultures. Jake Morrison and Princess Lirelei returned to Ethros Prime as heroes of the new age. The marriage that had begun as a political insult had become the symbol of galactic unity. They stood together on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out at a city where humans and Zephyrians walk side by side in the streets below. "Do you think it will last?" Lirelei asked. "This new alliance, this cooperation between species?" Jake put his arm around his wife and smiled.